morning. It's June 9th here in Seoul, and I'm Kim Dami. Let's begin with these stories making the headlines at this hour. Starting in the U.S., where areas on the East Coast have been blanketed with smoke and flying dust from Canada's wildfires. The U.S. East Coast is experiencing its worst air quality ever, with the smoke now reaching down to Washington, D.C. And smoky air conditions may return to New York City due to a sea breeze. South Korean leader Yoon has vowed for further support to boost the semiconductor industry. It says intensifying global chip competition is equivalent to an industrial war. South Korea lost to Italy at the FIFA U20 World Cup semifinals. The Young Tech Warriors will face Israel next Monday in the third-place playoff. Air quality in parts of the U.S. remain at hazardous levels due to smoke coming from the massive wildfires in Canada. President Joe Biden called the Canadian wildfires a stark reminder of the effects of climate change. Our Lee Seung-jae starts us off.
For the second straight day, parts of eastern United States have been covered in fine dust and smoke caused by massive wildfires in Canada. The air quality in the country's capital reached dangerous levels, with millions refraining from outdoor activities while stocking up on essential items such as masks. According to the Washington Post on Thursday, Washington, D.C. issued a purple warning, the second worst on the air quality index. A purple warning means conditions are very harmful to the health of all people, regardless of age or if they are suffering from a respiratory illness. The D.C. mayor's office says poor air conditions could get worse and asks people to refrain from going outside as much as possible. It also asks people to wear N95 or KN95 grade masks if they needed to go outdoors. Meanwhile, U.S. President Joe Biden on Thursday said in a statement that the devastating wildfires burning in Canada are another stark reminder of the impacts of climate change. He added that millions of Americans are now experiencing the effects of smoke resulting from the devastating wildfires. Biden also said that he held phone talks with Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, noting that the U.S. agreed to provide additional support necessary to accelerate firefighting efforts, including in Quebec, where fires in the area are having a direct impact on the U.S. He went on to say that the Environmental Protection Agency is monitoring air quality and providing important updates, adding that he instructed Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg to preemptively manage any impact on air traffic due to deteriorating air quality. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
Flooding from the destruction of Kakhovka Dam in Ukraine has devastated towns downstream. And local officials in Kherson say at least 9 people have been injured by shellings as civilians evacuated. Russia and Ukraine have accused each other of shelling during the evacuations. Despite the dam's collapse, the International Atomic Energy Agency has clarified that the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant in southern Ukraine is still able to pump water from a reservoir nearby, buying it more time before possibly switching to other cooling sources. The dam's operator had earlier said the reservoir could no longer supply water to the facility. Meanwhile, Russia's defense minister Sergei Shoigu said on Thursday that Russian troops have repelled a large-scale overnight attempt by Ukraine to break through the Russian lines in the Zaporizhzhia region. South Korea's drive to boost the semiconductor industry is in full swing, with the country investing billions of dollars more to maintain its lead in chips. Our Kim Do-yeon has the details.
President Yoon has called for nationwide efforts to protect and boost the country's chip-making competitiveness, saying the competition in the global semiconductor industry is an industrial war. This as he presided over the 17th Emergency Economy meeting with 60 industry insiders, including CEOs, scholars, and government officials on Thursday, strictly focused on the nation's chip export strength.
어찌됐든 이 반도체 전쟁에서 우리가 승리하려면은 민간의 혁신과 정부의 선도적 전략이 동시에 필요합니다. 기업과 투자, 유능한 인재들이 다 모이도록 정부가 이 제도와 제도 설계를 잘 하고 인프라를 잘 만들어야 됩니다.
Semiconductors account for a fifth of South Korea's total exports and take around 55% of its manufacturing investment. South Korean firms have led the industry's market share for the past 20 years, with companies such as Samsung Electronics and SK Hynix especially showing strength in memory chips. However, recently, it's seen hurdles with large markets such as the U.S. creating the CHIPS Act amid Washington's push and pull with Beijing, creating complications for South Korean companies' production lines, while Chinese chip makers slowly catching up with South Korea's market share. That said, President Yoon promised industry players that government support will be there.
President Yoon emphasized that semiconductors are South Koreans' livelihoods, their security, industry, and the economy itself, and called on ministers to get rid of any regulations that get in the way of the companies.
The Ministry of Trade, Industry, and Energy also announced on Thursday that it's looking into injecting more than $1 billion to foster up-and-coming technology in the industry, such as power semiconductors, chips for automobiles, and advanced packaging, among other lucrative investments. In the meantime, this is the second time President Yoon specifically addressed the high-tech industry in an emergency economy meeting after batteries in April. President Yoon, in efforts to re-emphasize, while at the same time motivate the participants, said when he goes abroad for multilateral summits, leaders are looking for one-on-one opportunities with him, all because of the country's technological competitiveness. And that's all thanks to the industry leaders. Kim Do-yeon, Arirang News.
The Korea Economy Research Institute on Friday has lowered South Korea's growth outlook for this year from 1.5% to 1.3%. The institute cited a declining consumption capacity due to high interest rates and other external factors such as overall sluggish economic growth in major economies around the world. It also said that a recovery in domestic demand will be difficult this year due to a slowdown in private consumption, facility investment, and construction investment. While the reopening of China was predicted to improve the country's economic growth this year, the institute noted that it fell short of expectations, with exports remaining sluggish. OpenAI CEO, the father of ChatGPT, Sam Altman, is visiting South Korea this week at the invitation of the country's Ministry of SMEs and Startups. His visit is timely that AI regulations are high on the agenda in countries around the world. For more, we're joined by Professor Park Joo-young from KST this morning. Welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me. Good morning.
Altman said back in March that he would visit a total of 17 countries, including South Korea, UK, France, and Australia. Why is he taking his time to visit so many countries? I mean, what is his trip to Seoul about?
Yeah, so he's the CEO of the hottest outfit in tech right now, and ChatGPT has had the most impact in recent memory, both technological and psychological. So Korea would want to hear from him since it is clearly lagging in language AI like the ChatGPT. And since he has been invited by the Minister of SME, small to medium enterprises and startups, it appears that the topics discussed will circle around tech research and business opportunities for domestic companies.
Right. Like I mentioned earlier, countries and organizations around the world are looking to come up with AI-regulated rules and regulations over those worries about the side effects of the technology. Altman himself has pointed out the need for an international body to control AI like IAEA. What's your take on this?
So there is this fear regarding AI's potential harms, especially the danger when the level of automation is so high that some catastrophic decisions could be made by AI without human supervision. And some have even argued for a freeze on AI research for a few months, or as you say, an AIEA-like organization that can oversee AI development. But there are some practical issues and suspicions over these motivations. First, unlike nuclear programs that require large-scale facilities and produce detectable traces of radioactive material, AI is basically a computer software that can be made on a laptop in a coffee shop. So it is hard to fathom how the quote-unquote freezing of research can be enforced at all. Should all computers be turned off with the threat of a prison sentence? It's like banning cooking because somebody says a fire can start a nuclear reaction in the kitchen.
Right.
And second, Yeah. Second, are we really sure that the industry leaders will cut into their own leading AI by not doing what they're good at? And those who are playing catch-up like Korea, will they really be motivated to let the gap with the big boys grow by stopping for a while? So before they voluntarily take actions first, I doubt that people will be fully trusting of their words at the moment.
Right. But the European Union is looking to pass AI Act into law within this year. Now, if it is passed, Professor, will it do anything really to tame AI-related worries and concerns? I mean, including ethical issues. What will that mean?
So the goal of the act is to limit certain uses of AI, for instance, face and emotion recognition that could infringe upon individual liberties and freedom, and ultimately harm an open and free society. So the act itself is well-intentioned, but it's still too early to conclude that all the concerns will have been addressed with a piece of legislation because AI still is a developing tech, and so I suspect that there are still so many unknown or unrecognized issues out there. So we have to keep in mind that regulations can alter the speed and direction of an innovation. So it is hard to tell the exact impact of the act on the future. So if the act stifles innovation and makes the EU fall behind the US, for instance, it could well lose support.
Then do you think because as far as I know, we don't have any regulations on AI at the moment here in South Korea, but do you think we should expect AI regulations from South Korea in the future?
So while Korea's economy is heavily science and tech-oriented and deeply coupled with the industrialized nations, so if they are moving in that direction, Korea will have to follow suit eventually. But seeing how far behind Korea is in some crucial area of AI, for instance, the language AI like the ChatGPT, I doubt that there's much appetite for regulation at the moment. And also, we as a society have yet to build a consensus on issues like what we do or do not want from AI, what is culturally acceptable or not. So there's still a long ways to go.
Right. All right, Professor Park Ju-young, thank you so much for your insight this morning.
Thanks for having me. Thank you.
Some disappointment for fans of South Korea's U20 footballers as they lost out to Italy in the competition's semi-final this morning. But despite the early hours, fans showed up in force at Gwanghwamun Sq to cheer on their team. Our Choi Soo-hyung was there.
It was an intense match. South Korea took on Italy for a place in the U20 World Cup final on Friday 6 a.m. Korea time. The Korea Football Association hosted the cheering event at Gwanghwamun Sq with the Seoul government and the official supporters of the U20 national football team, the Red Devils. And despite the early hours, the love and enthusiasm of South Korean football fans for their team.
Even though the semi-final kicked off at such an early time, fans didn't hesitate to show up to cheer South Korea's U20 team at the square.
The U20 World Cup is held every 2 years, but it was cancelled in 2021 due to COVID-19. The square was filled with excitement for South Korea's second consecutive U20 World Cup semi-final and a dream that they could do better than in 2019 when they lost in the final.
I think we struggled during the first half, but it seems like we'll come back in the second half and win 2-0. I hope we can make history by achieving the first ever World Cup victory for South Korea.
I'm really excited to be here in Seoul. I think the energy in the crowd is really great, and this seems like a really fun way to celebrate soccer, the U20 World Cup.
Italy, boasting their strongest squad, opened the scoring in the first half, but South Korea were all square 9 minutes later thanks to a penalty kick scored by Lee Seung-won. The goal brought fans from their seats, shouting loudly and shaking the square with their celebration. Tension, however, rose as the game went on, Italy having much of the possession. Then, with only 4 minutes remaining, Korean hearts were broken when the Italians took the lead and ultimately won the game 2-1. After the match, most of the fans tried to cheer the young Taeguk Warriors to give them a boost.
It was impressive to see our players. I was so proud and the support from the fans were fervent. Though it is disappointing, there's still the third, fourth place playoff, so I hope they gather their strength again.
Officials said as over 1,000 people gathered, the facilities were well equipped to ensure safety. Though South Korea lost the game, there is no doubt they'll be hopeful for new opportunities that lies ahead of them. Choi Soo-hyung, Arirang News.
South Korea's ruling and main opposition parties have agreed to establish a special committee on Japan's Fukushima wastewater release, and also a parliamentary probe into scandals involving the National Election Commission has been announced. Our Han Seong-woo reports.
South Korea's ruling People Power Party and its rival, the Democratic Party of Korea, have agreed to set up a special committee on Japan's plans to discharge radioactive wastewater from the crippled Fukushima nuclear power plant into the Pacific Ocean starting this summer. Details will still have to be ironed out, but the committee will be holding parliamentary hearings that could involve the 21-member team of Korean experts who recently returned from on-site inspections of the power plant's water treatment facilities.
Whom the special committee will consist of will be decided after a corresponding motion is submitted, sometime next week during a plenary session and later passed. The members will come from both parties, and following committee-level discussions will also decide when it will conduct its activities.
The parties have also agreed on a parliamentary probe into the National Election Commission, currently mired in a nepotism scandal over allegations of employment favoritism shown towards the children of several senior NEC officials.
There was an urge to delve into everything going on with the Election Commission without any limitations on the scope of the probe. But yes, the recent employment scandal is the one that has come under the most scrutiny.
The investigation will also cover allegations that the NEC came under nearly tens of thousands of hacking attempts by North Korea last year. The commission has been suspected of failing to detect some of those attempts. Han Seong-woo, Arirang News.
Good morning, I'm Matthew Ashley, and we now turn over to stories from around the world. We begin in France, where 4 young children under the age of 3 were wounded on Thursday in a stabbing attack in the Alpine town of Annecy. Now, among the children were 1 British and 1 Dutch national. 2 adults were also wounded. Health officials say that some of the victims required surgery, but that all the children are in stable condition. A 31-year-old Syrian asylum seeker suspected of carrying out the attack was arrested on site after being overpowered by police. The suspect had refugee status in Sweden. He came to France to seek asylum but was unsuccessful. Authorities say he has no criminal background and that a terrorist motive is unlikely. Now in Sudan, nearly 300 children have been rescued from ongoing crossfire between warring military factions. 200 of the children were below the age of 2. Humanitarian groups said on Thursday that the children and 70 caregivers were evacuated to the city of Wad Madani from the Maigoma orphanage in the capital of Khartoum. They were trapped by fighting between troops from the Sudanese military and the paramilitary Rapid Support Forces since mid-April. Since the start of the conflict, over 70 children have died at the state-run orphanage from hunger and illness. The rescue comes after another 97 children were evacuated from Maigoma and other small orphanages over the weekend by local activists. Now, the planet could see hotter weather this and next year as the El Niño weather system has begun. The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration said on Thursday that the weather phenomenon arrived 1 or 2 months earlier than usual. It's likely to bring drought to Australia, increased rain in the southern United States, and lead to a weakened monsoon season in India. El Niño could continue until next spring, after which its effects are expected to lessen. The group added that there's a 56% chance it will reach strong levels and a 25% chance it will be supersized. Scientists say the weather system may lead to new record high temperatures in 2024. And finally, the largest ruby ever to go on auction has been sold for a record-breaking $34.8 million. The 55.2 carat ruby went under the hammer on Thursday at the magnificent jewels auction held by Sotheby's in New York. Called Estrella de Fura, the stone has been described as the most valuable and important ruby ever to come to market. It was discovered in Mozambique in July last year. The sale beat the previous all-time high set in 2015 when a 25.6 carat stone called the Sunrise Ruby sold for $30.3 million.
Good morning. Overnight rain has let up in most areas, not to mention in Pocheon and other parts of Gyeonggi-do province were under a heavy rain advisory overnight. But now it's a bright and refreshing start to the day. Meanwhile, parts of Gangwon-do province will see 5 to 30 millimeters of more rain through the morning. Then there will be passing rain in inland areas of Gyeongsang-do provinces this afternoon. So it will be hotter and sunnier today for the central regions, with temperatures hiking to the upper 20s again, and southern inland areas will be as hot as yesterday. Strong UV rays will beam down with a high ozone level during the day, and those in Gyeongsang-do provinces need to brace for heat, sunshine, and passing rain today. Meanwhile, air quality will be normal to good nationwide all day. Then we'll have frequent rain in the forecast this weekend. On Saturday, central regions, Jeollabuk-do and Gyeongsang-buk-do provinces will see rain, while the capital area will receive rain around lunchtime into the evening. Then on Sunday, there will be scattered rain nationwide. Well, that's Korea for you, and here's a look at the international weather conditions.
That'll do it for us for today's New Day at Arirang. We'll be back next Monday at 9 a.m. Korea time. Thanks for watching.
자, 모두가 기다리던 제519회 라키사랑 정기총회를 시작하겠습니다. 네, 이번 정기총회의 안건은 말이죠. 라키를 사랑하는 마음을 어떻게 표현해야 하는지에 관한 것입니다.
저 의견 있습니다.
뭐죠?
이번 심플리 K-팝 콘투어에서 라키들에 대한 사랑을 엔딩 포즈로 표현하는 건 어떨까?
뭔가 힘을 줘서 팍 해봅시다.
빠밤빰빠밤빰.
오케이.
이렇게. 오, 전 좋습니다. 간단하고 아주 확실한 방법인 것 같아요. 어떤가요?
엔딩 포즈로 표현하는 것도 좋지만 독사 무대를 완벽하게 선보이는 것도 또 다른 방법이 될 수 있지 않을까요? 좋습니다. 그럼 우리 둘 다 한번 짧게 연습해볼까요?
뭐요?
둘, 독보다 더 독한 라라라라라 빠져들어.
와, 이 정도면 라키들이 우리 마음을 충분히 알아줄 것 같아요. 그죠?
Really?
Yes.
Okay. Will Secret Numbers Love reach Lockies? Find out on this week's Simply Contour. Don't miss out.
Loved and watched around the world. We want to make more animations to reach more children. Traveling time and space. Developing adventure and curiosity. Infinite creativity and hope. We want our children to grow up to be happy. Animation, watched by children all around the world. So that joy can be felt when our animation is watched. This is the reason we make animation and share with the world. K-Animation, befriending children all over the world.
춥지 않은가요? 처음 태어난 이별에서 사는 우리 손잡아요.
We're here to make a new type of news.
New insights, new styles, and new topics every day.
We are News Generation. Making news just for you. It's June 9th here in Seoul. I'm Yoon, and this is News Generation, where we make the news at Arirang's very own open studio. Every morning, we'll discuss the top issues and latest current affairs affecting people in their 20s and 30s. Joining me in the studio is Kim Seong.
Happy Friday, Yen.
Happy Friday. And Cheska Daina.
Happy Friday!
Double it.
I know, taking that a little bit further.
double it and give it to them.
Exactly. Now, both are here to speak on behalf of people in their 20s and 30s. As usual, let's start with our news feed, which covers different hashtags and news items that have been trending on social media over the past 24 hours. Now, the sky might look like it's from Mars, but this is actually from New York City. The city is seeing horrendous air quality because of the smoke that has drifted south from wildfires burning in Canada. Air quality levels have surpassed what the World Health Organization considers unhealthy, and that is why authorities have issued air quality advisories in the region. Now, Canada has been seeing its worst ever wildfire season. There are currently over 400 active wildfires in the country. Moving on to the second story, but still staying in the United States, we've seen Hawaii's youngest and most active volcano named Kilauea erupt early on Wednesday morning. The U.S. Geological Survey's Hawaiian Volcano Observatory detected a glow at around 4:40 a.m. The last time this volcano erupted was in January. Though there's no indication yet that populated areas are at risk, authorities have raised the alert level from watch to warning. Now, shifting gears to what's happening here in Korea. Recent internet trend stats have actually found that the number of people using the local portal Naver has dropped, especially teens and those in their 20s. A survey found that compared to those in their 30s and 40s who predominantly use the local portal, Gen Z rely on YouTube nearly the same way as older generations did with Naver. Now, experts believe this is because the younger generation prefers using visual and audio aid when taking in information. Now, we're going to take a closer look at the third news item. Naver is still at the top of the popularity game in terms of what people use to search for info in Korea, but analysts find the fact that youngsters are quickly turning to YouTube and Google should be a yellow flag for the homegrown portal. Now, another concerning point is how many are losing faith in the once revered Naver news portal. The same media survey company found that 45.6% still use Naver for their news, but a growing number flock to YouTube as well. In terms of looking for professional and academic data, though, Google had twice as many users as Naver. Now, what did you think about this news story, Cheska?
I mean, for me personally, I think this digital migration among young generation is actually quite normal. I mean, because first of all, we are the thumb generation and we want to get access to information very quickly. We don't want to read too much. So visual aid and auditory aid definitely helps in procuring information quickly. And also, we know that YouTube is level playing field for anyone. I mean, I've done a lot of research where expert interviews or even podcasts, there's just a flood of information that people publish, and it's just easier and faster to get these. But of course, we should always practice media literacy because there's absolutely no filtering whatsoever in terms of the information that gets put on YouTube.
Exactly. And as journalist to journalist, Young, I think it was a bit alarming for me to hear how people relied more on YouTube than Naver, which has contracts with actual journalists and actual broadcasters, right?
Yeah, I mean, to start off with just even Naver itself, it does operate a lot on blog basis as well. You do get some reference to the news outlets of South Korea, but that's quite limited, and you've got to go to another site, the actual news outlet, the broadcaster's website, to read those articles. So I think even Naver is sort of riddled with adverts quite often, with product placements and things like that, which is alarming. But YouTube, in essence, is full of fake news. A lot of it, I've experienced it firsthand. I've looked for stuff. I've actually even saw people looking up actual, showing me as evidence to their theory or something. Oh, this YouTuber said it, and it's totally nonsense.
This YouTuber said it. That's like the famous
quote. And to be honest, as a journalist myself, even the journalism itself, even the broadcasters, quite often lack some evidence, quite often isn't fully covering the story. There's some, behind stories and things like that. And I think if you really want to find out information, Google Scholars, looking at different articles, actual, academic pieces of writing might be a better start.
And if I may add on to it, it's always important to cross-check, use various sources and find out what the facts are. And that was our news feed for this Friday. And let's move on to our discussion topic. From this month, South Korea has been trying to expand its telehealth services. What's that about? Take a look at the screen to find out.
COVID-19 has changed the healthcare landscape. One change is that patients can now talk with their doctor on the phone and get their medicine delivered to their doorstep. The government allowed this type of telehealth service temporarily to stop the spread of COVID-19. From February 2020 to January 2023, around 14 million Koreans received telehealth treatment. Realizing how effective these services were, officials have decided to make telehealth permanent. How? By launching a pilot program from this month. But things don't seem to be going as smooth as planned. Some doctors have adamantly voiced that they're against this measure. Half of the clinics that are supposed to be providing this service have denied patients of this latest right. Today, NewsGen aims to answer 3 questions. 1. What do millennials and Gen Z think about the latest telehealth pilot project? 2. What should be done to better institutionalize this latest health policy? 3. How have other countries dealt with telehealth services?
It's been a week since South Korea started its telehealth services pilot project, and before we go any deeper, let's talk about what this project is about. Seong, tell us exactly what the latest telehealth plan is and what it aims to do.
Yeah, so telehealth or virtual medical assistance is any form of online or landline, non-face-to-face methods of receiving medical care and medicine. Since the spread of COVID-19 in 2020, telehealth care was temporarily granted by the government until April 2023. During the 3 years, a total of around 38 million patients had virtual medical treatment. Last week on June 1st, the Ministry of Health and Welfare announced a new pilot telehealth project for a period of 3 months. Let's have a look at the details. For the 3 months period, the telehealth project targets patients with chronic illnesses with a prior record of face-to-face consultation in the past year. For patients other than chronic conditions, you must have had an offline diagnosis within 30 days to qualify for virtual treatment. Service providers are limited to local clinics, but extended to hospitals for patients with rare diseases and post-operative care. Treatment methods are either video or voice calls. Besides the benefits of convenience, it also incurs costs about 30% extra compared to in-person hospital visits.
And to my knowledge, that's actually because the government wanted to make sure that this pilot project goes as planned. And even before it kicked off this month, many people, especially doctors, seem to be very against this.
Quite a controversy there.
Exactly. So why don't you walk us through what the controversy was?
Sure. And since COVID, telehealth sort of became a standard practice because, as we know, not many people could actually go and see the doctor because it's a contagious disease, and also, you know, the elderly and people who were immobile. So it sort of became a standard practice then. So when the government decided to take the project a little bit further, it definitely rose some controversies. Now, I think the first one is obviously lack of regulation at the moment. There is no set law or standard about what's allowed and what's not. I mean, can people just get prescription drugs to telehealth? How much can they get it? And also in terms of limitations in terms of physical exams. I mean, you can describe your symptoms, but you won't be able to see how the patient walks or how the patient feels, or, you know, be able to physically touch or examine.
Skin tones and all that, you'll be missing out.
Exactly, being able to see it. And, you know, even skin color, like what if you don't have the most high quality camera that transmits all the data? So there's a lot of things that doctors are concerned about in terms of misdiagnosis or not being able to properly treat the patient.
For sure. Seong, would you like to add anything?
Yes, I mean, I've read quite a few articles on it, and 3 things that doctors are mostly concerned about is, you know, one of them is definitely misdiagnosis. The second would be worries of over-commercialization of medical care. We've been seeing different startups and different platforms, medical platforms, trying to get into the field and make some money from it, which might be very concerning for the doctors themselves. Lastly, concerns about the collapse of the medical delivery system, medicine delivery system.
For sure.
So, you know, conventionally, medicine is safely delivered to the local pharmacy. Well, they get distributed if you bring your prescription. But if it's on an online basis, if everybody can deliver medicine, there's going to be quite a bit of worries about medicine getting lost in the middle.
Who's actually getting them?
Who's actually getting? You don't know receiving end. You might have signed up for your parents' medicine instead and get it sent to your home, and you take it yourself.
That's very true.
We don't see the reason for it, but, you know, that might be the case.
There's still many loopholes that need more work for sure. And before we continue our talks, we're also going to hear what our viewers had to say on today's topic. And we asked them what they think about telehealth services. So take a look at the screen to find out. Now, Kyle Y. Kim said, I live in Canada and I've been seeing my doctors online for years now. There are medical fields whereas an in-person session doesn't make any difference, and I can even get my pills delivered to my doorstep. Breakaway 2X said, while it certainly shouldn't replace in-person appointments, it's a great addition condition for cases or situations where in-person is not necessary. Some conditions can be diagnosed based on symptoms only, and others like mental or psychological issues can also be done. Kiran Kumar said, "My opinion on online medication is it should be seen as an additional facility, but people should not totally rely on it because if you go to a doctor, it will be more suitable." But in times like COVID-19, online medication was very helpful. So you can see that even for our viewers, they have different thoughts as to whether telehealth services is the way to go. Then where do you guys stand on this issue, starting with Cheska?
I actually loved all the comments from our viewers, and there are all the parts I do agree with. I think in some specific cases, especially mental services and, during cases like COVID and also follow-up care, I think telehealth can be beneficial. It's a slightly different scenario, but now mail-in test kits are becoming more popular. You can do a test and mail in and get your results. And during COVID, I personally experienced my grandparents having extreme difficulty trying to get an appointment with a doctor just to getting there, and especially people with disabilities who are immobile. So I think there are definitely some benefits of technology that we can take advantage of. However, I do agree that the regulation and the fear of medicine delivery and accountability is a huge problem. I mean, who are we going to take to court if something goes sour? Is it my computer for not delivering my facial expressions or my facial color properly? Or is it the doctor for the misdiagnosis? Or is it the patient for not providing enough information through telehealth?
Some might say even the government. Is it the fault of the government for
implementing the whole system?
Exactly.
So I mean, like for me, whilst I'm not completely against telehealth services, it's a bit concerning, the worries of misdiagnosis, but also it's very limiting, consequently having a far less sort of accurate diagnosis from the doctors, especially if it's the first time you're getting treatment. So I mean, as our viewers said, Canada and as personal experience, Israel also has sort of online pharmacy systems going on. And COVID-19 diagnosis, as you mentioned, was a lot easier. Because it's a respiratory symptom, you can get your self-test kits delivered to your home, and the doctors can just look if you're doing it well and be like, oh, that's positive. Yeah, some pills, have a couple of weeks of rest.
There was no other test that needed to be done other than shoving your nose.
But depending on the department, whether it's, orthopedics, otolaryngology, cancer, dermatology, some sections should be allowed and disallowed. Of course, things like dermatology might be a lot easier. You can actually just get a diagnosis from the physical examination of looking at the skin. And there have been a few startups that does clinic referrals. For the domestic ones in South Korea, there's ones called Scandem. I think Linkaverse, Lulu Labs already showcased the capacity for dermatological scanning based on AI data. So they could just quickly scan it and give the doctors an initial idea of what the patients might be doing. So I think for dermatology and certain sections like orthopedics might be a bit difficult because you've got to see if your bone's broken or not.
Like which part hurts, actually touch it.
But certain departments of medicine, I think the telehealth care is very useful.
And you guys both made very compelling arguments, but we're also going to include an integral part of this discussion, which is an actual doctor, and we're going to hear what he has to say on this matter. We'll include him in our talks right after this. Whether South Korea should properly implement telehealth services in hospitals and clinics has been the talk of the town since COVID-19. And from this month, authorities have launched a pilot project to test this virtual medical examination option out. But as we discussed before, many doctors have sternly opposed this. To find out why, we're going to include a professor of molecular medicine and biopharmaceutical sciences in our talks. It's Professor Howard Lee from Seoul National University. Welcome, Professor Lee.
Happy Friday. It feels like I have to imitate the way that you started the news show.
Fantastic.
Yes,
Good morning,
we're
Professor.
feeling the positive vibes in the air right now. Now, Professor Lee, I would like to ask you the first question. What are the main arguments behind this so-called telehealth controversy in Korea? And what are doctors saying, and why is the health ministry still trying to push this?
That's $1 million question. Well, in general, doctors are not in favor of telehealth, or I should say they vehemently oppose that. Patient safety is their primary concern. So if something goes wrong, such as misdiagnosis or patient outcome, untoward patient outcome, who is going to be responsible? I mean, legally and non-legally as well. And a lot of doctors are very much concerned about this possibility, particularly in a context such as in Korea as of now, where many people are not quite into, are against the way that doctors are doing their, clinical businesses. So many doctors are really concerned about if they might be, they could be put into a front line if something goes wrong, even though they do not necessarily have not done a job wrong. So that is the primary concern. Of course, the quality of service is not guaranteed. We don't have any control over the validity of tools, equipment that will be used in telehealth. You know what? Traditionally, there are 4 different ways we can rely on when we diagnose a patient. Auscultation, hearing, and palpation and touch and percussion, something like this, and also visual diagnosis. And if we rely on telehealth, we have to rely only one of them, a visual diagnosis. So basically, it rips doctors a lot of diagnostic tools that we haven't familiar with using them. And also, it is administratively more taxing. We do not know how to confirm the validity of patients' identity using telehealth. And that list goes on and on and on. So that's why doctors are not in quite favor of telehealth. But the government is still pushing this new modality of medical service, because as we collectively as a society, as we have watched it in the COVID-19 pandemic, telehealth might work in some situations. So the government does not want to let it go as a one-off. And also, right.
Go ahead.
No. That is the main kind of motivation by the government, because the government has a long belief that continuous uninterrupted care of patients with chronic disease is quite important, particularly not only for the patients as well, but it will eventually reduce the health costs in general. So that is something that can be achieved by adopting telehealth into South Korea. That is. Yeah.
And I think the government itself is trying to promote the industry itself, the telehealth, the virtual medication, the system as an industry itself, part of the 4th Industrial Revolution and things like that to get into the future. But Professor, what do you think needs to be done for this type of health services, sort of online health services, to be institutionalized and maybe have a success in the future?
Well, you know what? Currently, telehealth is not institutionalized in the Medical Services Act. So, telehealth, legally speaking, it is against the current existing law in South Korea. So, the Congress should revamp the law and legally authorize telehealth and its related services. I think that's why the government started first a pilot project as of June 1st, as you mentioned, before they pursue additional legal route. So I think it is very indispensable to first show that the pilot project will have worked out as it was planned and expected to. And protection of personal information, particularly sensitive personal information, is very important because many patients will use some kind of apps. And the private information will remain on those apps. And who is going to control over those kind of pieces, sensitive personal information? There is no current standard or legal way to protect patients from their private information being stolen. So that is something that we have to really seriously consider before we go further. And also, as I mentioned earlier, the validation of equipment is quite important. Well, in telehealth, a doctor once, I asked the patient to measure his or her blood pressure, and then we do not really know whether the equipment tool, blood pressure monitoring tool, has been validated. Do we have to rely on whatever numbers that it will come up? It is something that need to be discussed further. But nobody has talked about that kind of validation quite deeply yet.
And Professor, you definitely gave us a lot of very important considerations that we need to take into account. So I think in this case, precedents are always very important. So are there any other countries that have implemented telehealth, and what can we possibly learn from it, and what can Korea implement that have been effective in moving further?
Well, not many before COVID-19. Only the US, Canada, and Norway is another country, particularly for the Arctic area, as we may understand. The geographical situation, peculiarity of Norway. Well, but when it comes to the US, telehealth has been effective since early 1990, particularly through the Medicare program for the elderly. But still, telehealth has remained a minuscule part of that of the program in general. But what I think by learning, lessons obtained from those previous experiences, I think I can, sort out a couple of success factors that we have to adopt if we really want to. Telehealth can become another modality, new modality of medical services.
Right, Professor. Due to time, could you narrow it down to one, please? We would love to hear it, but one point would be great. Thank you.
Oh, well, strong government involvement is quite important. Right.
For sure. Strong government involvement, because as you mentioned, there's still issues we should consider: accountability, accuracy, and privacy. Thank you so much for your time, Professor. It was such a pleasure to hear from you today.
Thank you. You're very welcome. Thank you.
All right, and we're going to move on to the final thoughts of today's episode. What are some things we need to keep in mind then for this type of telehealth service pilot project to go the way, as the doctor mentioned, to go successfully then?
Dr. Lee mentioned so many great points that I was soaking everything in, and there are some considerations that he brought up that we didn't even could think about. But I think he mentioned in the last point, active and proper government involvement. I think regulation is definitely a key in this case. So how much government gets involved?
We must be able to represent the opinions of all participants of the medical care system, especially doctors, medical institutions, and the patients themselves. And of course, the primary concern must be the quality of medical care that the patients will be receiving. So I think the concern lies there.
All right, and that's all we have for you today, and we'll be here every day from 9:30 to 10 a.m. Korea time, bringing you more topics young people are talking about. Special thanks to Kim Xiang.
My pleasure.
And Jessica Dainong.
Pleasure's always mine. Thank you.
And thank you everyone for watching. We'll see you next week. We are
News Generation.
K animation, loved and watched around the world.